People think hard work always pays off. But that's a lie they tell you in motivational posters and graduation speeches. Sometimes, hard work just breaks you down slowly, year after year, until you're nothing but calloused hands and quiet hopes. I was never ashamed of my life. I worked construction most of my adult years, then nights at a cleaning job, just to keep up with rent and tuition. I never finished high school myself. Never had the chance. My father died when I was 12, and I had to start helping out at the mechanic shop down the road before I was even old enough to drive. But I swore, when my son was born, that his life would look nothing like mine. He would never feel small. He would never go to bed hungry or get laughed at because he didn't know what a thesis was or how to spell bureaucracy. Everything I never had, I would give him. I remember the day Daniel was born. His mother was still groggy from the epidural, and I just stood there holding him, stunned, overwhelmed, and crying silently. I had never felt that kind of love before, raw, protective, and terrifying. I made a promise right then and there, in the hospital room, whispering into his tiny ear, "I'll give you everything, even if it kills me." And I did. I worked through holidays, missed birthdays. I took extra shifts in the rain, pulled double duty when coworkers called out sick. My back screamed most days before noon, but I kept going. I bought every textbook he needed, upgraded his laptop twice in high school, paid for tutoring when he struggled in chemistry. I stayed up with him reviewing college essays, even though I barely understood half the words on the page. And when those acceptance letters started rolling in, I felt like I had gotten in. Like all those years weren't wasted after all. Daniel was smart. No doubt about it. Sharp as a tack and quick with words. Too quick, sometimes. He had this way of turning a compliment into a lecture. "Dad, don't say ain't. It makes you sound uneducated," he told me once when he was 15. I laughed it off. It didn't sting then. I figured he'd grow out of it. I was proud of his intelligence, even when it came with an edge. I figured that edge would soften with time, maturity. It didn't. If anything, it got sharper the more educated he became. Somewhere along the way, my son started confusing degrees with dignity. The more he climbed, the more he looked down. And the more he looked down, the less he saw me. Still, I kept showing up. Every parents' night, every school award ceremony. I sat through lectures I didn't understand and read newsletters full of words like pedagogical frameworks and extracurricular synergies. I didn't care. I was just happy to see him shine. Even when he didn't say thank you. Even when he didn't introduce me to his friends. Even when he winced at my work boots or corrected my grammar in public. That's what parents do, right? We absorb the slights, tuck them away, tell ourselves they're just kids. That one day, they'll look back and realize how much we did. How much we gave. I waited for that day for over 20 years. When Daniel got accepted into one of the top universities in the state, I almost fainted. Full tuition, paid by me. No loans. No part-time job for him. I sold the land I inherited from my mother to cover his last year. That land was the only thing I had left from her, but I didn't hesitate. I wanted his path clear, smooth, paved. And to make things easier, I bought him a used car when he moved off campus, then signed over the deed to the small house I'd just finished paying off. "It's yours now," I told him, "so you won't have to worry about rent after graduation." He barely looked up from his phone when he mumbled, "Thanks." But I figured he was just overwhelmed. Busy, focused on finals. So I brushed it off, the way I always did. That was my job. To understand, to forgive, to carry on. People told me I was spoiling him. My sister, Marlene, said it straight to my face one Thanksgiving. "He needs to learn some respect," she muttered as Daniel scrolled on his phone during dinner. I chuckled then, waved her off. "He's just young," I said. "He'll grow into it." But deep down, a small voice had already started whispering. What if he doesn't? I ignored that voice for years. Kept turning up the volume on my pride to drown it out. But pride, it turns out, has a funny way of shrinking when you need it most. Graduation day was supposed to be our victory lap. I ironed my shirt 3 times, bought a new belt, and practiced what I might say if someone asked me how I felt. I got there early and sat in the sun for 2 hours just to make sure I had a good seat. When Daniel crossed that stage, cap tilted just right, I clapped until my hands hurt. I waited by the bleachers afterward, heart pounding, smile wide, ready for a hug, a picture. anything. But what I got instead was a slap in the face that no one else saw, but that I'll never forget. "Dad," he said, glancing at my clothes, then at the people around us. "You didn't have to come. I mean, this is kind of for, like, my academic circle. You wouldn't really get it." And then, almost as a joke to the others nearby, he added, "He's sweet, but he's not exactly Ivy League material." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was all I could do to stop the shaking in my hands. That laugh, hollow, short, was my final gift to him. One last moment of protection. One more mask to hide the pain. I told him I had to get back to work, even though it was a Saturday. He shrugged and said, "Okay, cool," before walking off with his friends. He never asked how I got there, never offered a ride home, never looked back. I walked 2 miles to the nearest bus stop and sat alone for an hour, staring at the diploma I helped pay for but wasn't allowed to hold. By the time I got home, something inside me had broken. Not a crack, not a bruise, but a clean, sharp break. The kind that doesn't heal right. I sat in the kitchen, staring at my calloused hands, and realized I had built a man who thought I was beneath him. I gave him everything and somehow, in the process, lost myself. The next morning, I woke up feeling like my body had aged 20 years overnight. Every joint ached, my back locked up, and my chest felt hollow. I sat at the kitchen table with my black coffee, no cream, no sugar, same as always, and just stared out the window at the sun slicing through the blinds. The birds were chirping like it was any other Sunday, like the world hadn't shifted under my feet the day before. But I felt it. I felt it in the way my shoulders slumped forward, in the weight behind every blink. I'd come to that graduation expecting pride, maybe even a sliver of gratitude, but I left with something else entirely: humiliation. Not the loud kind that turns you red in the face, but the quiet kind that stains everything. The kind you carry home with you like mud on your boots that won't wash off no matter how many times you wipe. I kept replaying his words in my head. "You didn't have to come. He's not exactly Ivy League material." Over and over, like a skipping record. And it wasn't just what he said, it was how he said it. That dismissive tone, the casual smirk, the way he looked at me like I was a piece of outdated furniture he was embarrassed to admit came from his home. I kept thinking, how did we get here? I raised that boy with everything I had. And he stood there, in a cap and gown that I paid for, acting like I was the charity case. I didn't cry. Not then. I couldn't. My pride wouldn't let me. But I did something I'd never done before, not in 22 years of being a father. I opened my filing cabinet, pulled out the deed to the house, the car title, and my will, and laid them all out on the table. My hands trembled as I picked up the phone and called my lawyer, Mitch Daniels. Mitch had been handling my affairs for the past decade, ever since I started getting serious about estate planning. He was a good man, straightforward, no fluff. When he answered, I skipped the pleasantries. "I need to make some changes," I said. My voice was low but steady. "What kind of changes, Mr. Carter?" he asked. "I want to revoke the deed transfer on the house," I said, "and sell the car. And I want to change my will, leave everything to the Harmony House orphanage." Daniels out. There was a pause on the line. Then Mitch cleared his throat. "Understood. Are you sure about this?" "Dead sure," I replied. "Do it today. I don't want a single thing in my name benefiting someone who sees me as beneath him." The call ended, and I sat back in my chair, stunned by the clarity in my own voice. For the first time in years, I wasn't hesitating. I wasn't justifying or forgiving or making excuses. I was finally doing something for me, not to hurt Daniel, but to reclaim my damn dignity. That house was my blood and bone, built over years of toil and stretch. That car, a symbol of my commitment to making his life easier. And my will, that was everything I ever owned, all meant to ensure he never struggled like I did. But what good was all of that if it went to someone who spit on the very foundation it came from? By 4 p.m., the paperwork had been drafted and sent. I signed it electronically from my email, with shaking fingers, but no regrets. 6 hours after Daniel's graduation, an eviction notice was legally issued for the house he lived in. Not out of spite, but because he needed to learn something school would never teach him. That respect isn't optional. That the hand that feeds you deserves better than ridicule. Around 6:30, my phone rang. It was Daniel. I let it go to voicemail the first time, then the second. On the third, I picked up. "What the hell is this?" he yelled. No greeting. No explanation. Just straight to rage. "There's a notice on my door saying I have 30 days to vacate. You can't do that." "I can't," I said calmly. And I did. "You're serious?" he shouted, his voice cracking. "You're actually kicking me out of the house?" "That house was a gift." "It was," I said. "But gifts come with trust. And you broke that." "You're being insane," he said, almost laughing now. "You're going to throw away our entire relationship over a stupid joke? Because I said you weren't Ivy League material?" "No," I said quietly. "Because you meant it. And because you meant to humiliate me in front of people. That wasn't a joke. That was how you really feel." There was silence on the other end. Then he exploded. "You know what? If this is how you're going to act, then maybe I should disown you. Maybe I don't need a father who throws tantrums like a child." I let that sit for a moment before answering. "You're too late," I said. "I already disowned you." He went quiet again, but I could hear his breathing, heavy, angry. "I've changed my will," I added. "Everything's going to charity. I don't want you to have a single thing I've worked for." "You're being a vindictive old man," he hissed. "Maybe," I said, "but I'm also a man who finally woke up." He hung up, just like that. No goodbye, no apology, just a storm of anger and entitlement and disbelief that the rules he thought were unshakable had finally cracked. I stared at the blank screen of my phone and exhaled. For the first time in years, I felt light. Not happy. No, not even close to happy, but clear. Resolved. I poured myself another cup of coffee, cold now, but I didn't care. I stood by the window and watched the street, the wind gently moving the trees, kids biking by like life hadn't just shifted in some permanent way. And in that stillness, I let myself cry. Just a few tears, nothing dramatic. Quiet, like everything else about me. I wasn't grieving the loss of a son. I was grieving the illusion that he ever truly saw me. The next morning, I signed the final papers. Mitch had sent over the revocation forms for the house deed, confirmation of the car's sale listing, and the updated will. I reviewed every page slowly, deliberately, not because I doubted the decision, but because I wanted to feel each word. I wanted to remember what it felt like to take something back after giving everything away. The house would be listed within the week, and the car, his silver Honda I bought barely 2 years ago, was already up on 3 used car platforms. My signature trembled slightly on the last page, but not from regret. It was from the weight of the years behind it, 22 of them, to be exact, each one etched with sacrifice, missed holidays, and overtime hours. I clicked submit and closed the laptop. It was done. For the rest of the day, I barely moved. I sat on the porch with a glass of sweet tea and let the silence stretch around me like a heavy coat. I wasn't waiting for a call. I knew he wouldn't reach out again so soon. Daniel was proud, maybe even more than I had realized. He wouldn't call unless he thought he could win, and after last night, he must have known the rules had changed. He wasn't speaking to the same father who caved at every guilt trip. This version of me, this one had reached his limit. And the quiet in my house, the absence of his footsteps, his late-night calls asking for money, his barely there greetings, felt like peace I didn't know I needed. Later that evening, I got a call from Marlene. She'd heard. Word travels fast in families like ours, tight enough to meddle, distant enough to judge from afar. "You evicted your own son?" she said. No hello, no preamble. "Yes," I replied flat. "What the hell happened, Raymond?" I sighed and leaned back in my chair, rubbing my forehead. "He humiliated me, Marlene. Not just privately, publicly. He made it clear I was nothing to him." "He's your son," she shot back. "You don't just cut your child off like that." "I didn't cut him off," I said quietly. "He let go of me a long time ago. I just stopped pretending I was still holding on." She was quiet for a beat, and I could almost hear her adjusting her position on the other end. "You're not thinking clearly," she said finally. "He's young, he says stupid things. That's what kids do. He's not a kid anymore." I snapped, sharper than I intended. "He's a grown man. He graduated college. He stood on a stage I paid for and treated me like dirt beneath his shoes. That wasn't a phase, Marlene. That was who he is." There was a long pause. "You really changed your will?" she asked. I did. To the orphanage? Yes. Another pause, longer this time. Well, she said slowly, at least they'll appreciate it. That night, as I got into bed, I played his voicemail again. Not because I needed to hear it, but because I wanted to remember what it sounded like when the last thread snapped. His voice was full of anger, disbelief, a hint of panic. Not once did he apologize. Not once did he say he understood. He kept calling it a joke, kept accusing me of overreacting. But here's the thing. If something breaks you, it doesn't matter whether the other person thought it was a joke. It still broke you. The next day, I boxed up some of Daniel's childhood things that were still in the garage. Old toys, report cards, a shoebox full of letters he wrote me in elementary school. Dear Dad, you're my hero. Dear Dad, thank you for working so hard. I sat on the floor, surrounded by those scraps of forgotten affection, and let myself feel every inch of the distance between that little boy and the man he'd become. Somewhere along the way, he had outgrown me, and instead of carrying me with him, he left me behind like an embarrassing relic. I considered throwing the box out, burning it even, but I didn't. I taped it shut and labeled it, Daniel, keep or toss. I wasn't going to make that decision for him. If he ever grew up enough to come back with humility, maybe he'd want those memories. And if he didn't, well, they'd sit in the attic until the dust covered them completely. Around noon, I got another call. This time it was from a family friend, Marcus, who used to babysit Daniel back when he was in high school and I was pulling night shifts. Hey, Mr. Carter, he said, hesitant. I saw Daniel's post. What post? On Instagram, he said. He made it public. Said you threw him out, changed your will, and that you were punishing him for outgrowing his upbringing. He's not painting you kindly. I let out a breath through my nose. Of course he'd take it public. Did he mention what he said to me? I asked. No, Marcus replied. Just made it sound like you were bitter and controlling. I chuckled, low and bitter. Let him talk, I said. People always show you who they are when they think they're winning. Marcus hesitated. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For what it's worth, I always saw how much you did for him. You were more present than most dads I knew. Thank you, son, I said. That means more than you know. We hung up, and I pulled up the post myself. It was worse than I imagined. Caption with some quote about outgrowing people who don't support your evolution. Comments full of his friends consoling him, calling me old-fashioned, bitter, insecure. It stung. Not because I cared about strangers' opinions, but because it confirmed what I had feared all along. Daniel had no intention of understanding. He didn't just disagree with me. He believed he was better than me. And worse, he wanted the world to believe it too. I didn't comment. I didn't respond. I just logged off and deleted the app. Some bridges don't need to be burned. They collapse under the weight of truth, all on their own. The voicemail came 3 days after Daniel's social media post. Long enough for the dust to settle, just enough to sting again. I'd been keeping to myself, spent most of the week sorting through my tools, cleaning out the garage, and making long overdue repairs on the back fence. My hands needed something to do. Something repetitive. Something solid. Wood doesn't lie to you. A warped board shows its flaws right away. It doesn't wait until the middle of a celebration to turn on you and say you were never worth much in the first place. But sons will smile with your money in their pocket and shame on their tongue, and you won't even see it coming. That morning, I'd gone out to buy nails at the hardware store when my phone buzzed in my jacket pocket. One missed call. One voicemail. I didn't recognize the number right away, but I didn't need to. The second I hit play and heard his voice, familiar, furious, and a little too calm, I knew exactly who it was. Daniel wasn't yelling this time. He wasn't frantic like he had been on the first call. No, this one was different. This one had been rehearsed. Hey, I figure you won't answer, so I'm just going to say what I need to say, his voice began, clipped and calculated. You think you're teaching me a lesson by cutting me off? By making me look like a villain to your friends and mine? But here's the thing. You chose to be a martyr. You chose to make this about pride instead of love. What kind of father gives up on their kid over a single comment? I paused the message. My thumb hovered over the delete button, but I couldn't do it. Not yet. I needed to hear the rest. Maybe part of me still hoped he'd turn that corner. Say the words I needed to hear. So I pressed play again. I've talked to Aunt Marlene, and even she thinks you're going too far. You're destroying our relationship over your ego. And honestly, maybe you are stuck in the past. Maybe your pride is more important to you than your family. If that's the case, fine. I won't stop you. But don't expect me to come crawling back when you realize what you lost. Then came the worst part. The part one hadn't expected. I'm done trying to fix something you clearly don't value. You raised me. Yeah, but that doesn't give you control over who I become. I'm not your project. I'm not your shadow. I'm me. And if you can't accept that, then maybe we're better off going our separate ways. Click. That was it. No, I love you. No hint of remorse. Just a final shot, clean and cold. I stood in my driveway with my phone still in my hand, and the morning sun beating down on the back of my neck, and for a moment, I couldn't move. It hit me, not just his words, but the finality in them. He wasn't trying to make things right. He wanted to win. And I wasn't a person to him anymore. I was an obstacle. A mirror he didn't want to look into. I went back inside, poured myself a drink, not tea this time, but something stronger, and sat in the living room, staring at the walls. The silence in the house felt louder now, like it was pressing in on all sides. I thought of the nights I carried him to bed after he fell asleep in front of the TV, the time I skipped my pain meds for a week so I could afford his winter coat, the way he used to grab my hand at crosswalks even when he was too old to do it. Where had that boy gone? A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. I assumed it was Mitch or someone from the realtor's office, until I opened it and saw someone I hadn't expected. Camille. Camille was Daniel's ex-girlfriend. They'd dated for 3 years, off and on, through college. She was quiet, thoughtful, and polite. The kind of girl who always asked how I was doing, brought homemade cookies during the holidays, and once spent an hour helping me move furniture without complaining. She looked nervous now, standing there with her arms crossed and eyes heavy. "Mr. Carter," she said softly. "Can I come in?" I nodded and stepped aside. We sat at the kitchen table, same spot where I'd signed the papers a few days earlier. She didn't touch the glass of water I offered, just kept her hands in her lap, fingers knotted together. "I saw the post," she said finally. "I figured you might. And the comments," she added. It's not right. What he's saying about you." I raised my eyebrows. "You're the first to say that out loud." She looked down, then met my gaze again. "He's always been complicated. When we were together, he'd get frustrated any time someone reminded him where he came from. He hated feeling small. But the thing is, you never made him feel small. That was all in his head." Her words hit like a hammer. I felt them settle somewhere deep, in the part of me that still questioned whether I'd failed as a father. "I tried to tell him," she continued. "Tried to remind him what you did for him. But he wouldn't listen. He kept saying you were trying to guilt him. That you wanted him to be ashamed of how far he's come." I leaned back, letting out a slow breath. All I ever wanted was for him to remember who helped him get there. That's all. Not worship. Not repayment. Just respect. She nodded, her eyes glistening. "I know. I just wanted you to hear it from someone else. You're not crazy. You're not wrong." After she left, I sat with her words for a long time. The voicemail still lingered in my phone, but I didn't play it again. I didn't need to. I already knew what it said, what he thought, what he believed. And hearing Camille, someone who'd seen both sides, validate my pain, that did more for me than any apology Daniel could have fake mumbled through gritted teeth. That night, I stood at the threshold of Daniel's old bedroom. It was still mostly empty, save for the box I'd packed and a few posters he left behind. I closed the door slowly and turned the lock. It wasn't symbolic. It was necessary. Some doors have to stay shut if you want to keep the peace inside the rest of the house. By the end of the week, my phone had turned into a battlefield. Missed calls, voicemails, text messages from numbers I hadn't seen in years. Some were from cousins I barely remembered, others from old coworkers, neighbors, church folks. Everyone suddenly had an opinion about me and Daniel. The social media post had done what it was designed to do, stir the pot. And now, everyone wanted a piece of the stew. Some were polite about it, couching their judgment in faux concern. "He's your only son, Ray. Are you sure this is worth it?" Others were less subtle. "I always thought you were too hard on that boy." One text even said, "You're gonna die alone, man. Think about that." I didn't reply to any of them. Let them talk. People love a good fall from grace story, especially when it's not their own. And the image of a hard-working father cutting off his college graduate son? Oh, they ate it up. Made me the villain. Called me bitter, ungrateful, even jealous. As if I was mad at him for outpacing me. As if success meant a damn thing when it cost you your soul. No one cared about what Daniel said. No one repeated that part. The part where he mocked me in front of strangers, dismissed me like I was a mistake he hadn't figured out how to erase. That part didn't make for good gossip, I guess. I stayed off social media. I stopped going to church, too. Not forever, but for now. I didn't want to sit through another forced sermon about forgiveness or fake smile my way through post-service conversations with people who were only there to ask for the real story. I kept to myself, went on long walks, listened to the radio, cooked for one. And though the silence sometimes pressed in around me, I wore it like armor. Because deep down, I knew this was necessary. I was protecting something sacred, my self-respect. One evening, as I was pulling weeds in the front yard, my neighbor Eleanor stopped by. She was in her 60s, always wore pink lipstick, and carried a kind of sharp kindness that could cut you if you weren't careful. "You holding up, Raymond?" she asked, shading her eyes from the setting sun. I stood up and wiped my hands on my jeans. Trying to. She glanced around, as if checking for eavesdroppers, then leaned in slightly. "I read the Post, and I want you to know, not everyone thinks you're wrong." That took me by surprise. I blinked. "No." She shook her head. "I raised 2 boys. One's a teacher, the other's in prison. You do your best, but at some point, they make their own choices. What your son said about you, that wasn't a slip. That was cruelty dressed up as intellect." I swallowed, throat suddenly tight. She continued, "You have every right to draw the line. Don't let the town shame you for having a backbone. God gave it to you for a reason." I nodded slowly, unsure what to say. She didn't wait for a reply, just patted my shoulder and walked back to her porch, leaving me standing there with dirt on my palms and something close to gratitude in my chest. Her words didn't erase the pain, but they anchored me. Sometimes that's all you need to keep standing. But not everyone was as understanding. 2 days later, I got a knock on my door. I opened it to find none other than Daniel. Arms crossed, expression tight, dressed like he was on his way to a job interview. It was the first time I'd seen him in person since graduation day. And for a moment, I just stood there, absorbing the sight of him. Taller than I remembered. Sharper. But there was something brittle behind his eyes. Something that looked a lot like desperation. "Dad," he said, voice low. "Can we talk?" I didn't answer. Just stepped aside and let him in. He walked straight to the kitchen, sat in his usual seat at the table like no time had passed at all. He cleared his throat. "Look, I shouldn't have said what I said." I waited. That wasn't an apology. That was a vague regret. He continued, "I was nervous. I was trying to fit in. I didn't think you'd take it so seriously." There it was again, that same tone, the same spin, as if the problem was my reaction, not his action. I sat down across from him, arms folded. "You humiliated me, Daniel. Not accidentally. Not in private. You planned it. You wanted to look bigger in front of your friends, and I was just the prop you used to get there." He sighed and looked away. I said I shouldn't have done it. "What more do you want?" "I want the truth," I said. "Do you actually regret it, or are you just mad you're facing consequences?" His jaw tightened. "Both," he muttered. I nodded. That's what I thought. A long silence fell between us. I watched him squirm, watched the confidence drain from his posture inch by inch. "I've been staying with a friend," he said finally. "But it's temporary. I thought maybe we could talk about the house." I leaned back, exhaling hard. There it was. The real reason he came. "I told you," I said. "The house is being sold." He looked up, eyes narrowing. "You're really going through with this?" "I already did." He scoffed. "You're unbelievable." "No," I said, standing up. "I'm done being too believable. That's what got me here. You walked all over me because you assumed I'd never push back." He stood too, but didn't move. Just stared at me like I was someone he didn't recognize anymore. And maybe I wasn't. Maybe I had finally become the man who knew his worth and refused to let anyone, even his own son, take it for granted. "You're making a mistake," he said, voice shaking now. "One you can't come back from." "Maybe," I said. "But I'd rather live with that than spend one more day pretending disrespect is love." He didn't say goodbye, just turned and walked out the door, leaving it half open behind him. I closed it gently, not with anger, but with finality, like sealing the last page of a book you've read too many times. The ending never changes, but this time, you choose not to reread it. Weeks passed. The house sold faster than I expected. 3 offers in the first week, 2 of them above asking price. A retired couple from out of state ended up buying it. They sent a sweet handwritten note with the closing paperwork, thanking me for keeping it so lovingly maintained. That line stayed with me. Lovingly maintained. The house that I built, room by room, to keep my son safe. Now it belonged to strangers. But the truth was, it hadn't felt like his house in a long time. That place had become a shrine to a version of him that didn't exist anymore. One that still hugged me tight before school, that left scribbled notes on the fridge saying, "Love you, Dad," next to drawings of rocket ships and stick figures with hard hats. I couldn't live among ghosts, not anymore. The car sold too. A young woman with 2 part-time jobs came to test drive it. She was nervous, clutched her license like it might shatter, kept apologizing for asking questions. I told her not to worry, gave her a discount without her even asking. "This was for my son," I said, handing over the keys. "But I think it's meant for someone who knows what it means to earn things." She blinked like she might cry, then nodded and thanked me 3 times before driving off. I watched the taillights disappear down the road, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel hollow. I felt light. Word got around that I followed through, that I really sold the house and car, that Daniel had moved in with a friend and was working a job he didn't want to talk about. A few family members reached out, some out of concern, others out of morbid curiosity. I answered when I felt like it. I kept my answers short. No explanations. No justifications. Let them believe what they want. I'd spent too many years explaining myself to people who didn't want to understand. The will update was finalized. Harmony House Orphanage was officially the sole beneficiary. I visited one Saturday afternoon, just to see it with my own eyes. The place wasn't big. 2 floors, chipped paint, a tired-looking swing set out back, but the kids inside lit the place up like Christmas. They ran around with scraped knees and mismatched socks, shouting over each other in 3 different conversations. One little girl offered me a plastic tiara and asked if I wanted to be the fancy grandpa. I wore it for 20 minutes. No one laughed at me. No one mocked me. They just smiled like I belonged there. I left a quiet donation check that day. Nothing flashy, just something to hold them over until the estate passed. The director hugged me like I'd saved a life. Maybe I had. Or maybe I was just trying to stitch up the part of me that still bled every time I looked at old photos. Either way, it felt right. Then, one afternoon, a letter came. No return address. Just my name, handwritten in careful, familiar script. I hesitated before opening it, part of me bracing for another blow. But the first line made my breath catch. "I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I hear you now." It was from Daniel. The letter wasn't long, maybe a page and a half, but it carried more weight than anything he'd said to me in years. He admitted to his arrogance, admitted to being afraid that if he honored where he came from, people might think less of him. "I thought I had to erase my roots to prove I belonged," he wrote. "But all I did was make myself hollow." He didn't ask for money, didn't beg for the house or the car. He just asked that I remember the little boy who loved me fiercely. And he promised that, someday, if I was willing, he'd like to find his way back, not to my wallet, but to my respect. I didn't cry. But I did sit with the letter for a long time, my fingers tracing the ink like it might smudge under my touch. I didn't write back. Not yet. I didn't know if I ever would. But I kept the letter. Not as a doorway, but as a window. A small opening through which light might one day filter in again. Some evenings, I still think of him. I wonder what he eats for dinner. If he remembers how to cook the chili recipe I taught him. If he still bites his nails when he's nervous. I wonder if he's really sorry, or if he just hates being alone. But then I remind myself, those questions don't change what happened. They don't undo the years of feeling invisible, the graduation day sting, the voicemail that cut deeper than a knife. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's letting go of the hope that the past could have been any different. These days, I spend most of my time at the orphanage. I help fix the swing set. I read bedtime stories on Thursday nights. They call me Mr. Ray, and sometimes Grandpa Ray. I bring snacks and tell them silly jokes that make them roll their eyes and giggle anyway. One boy, Marcus Jr., asked me why I didn't have kids of my own. I smiled and said, I did. But now I've got a whole new batch of them. And the truth is, that's enough. More than enough. Sometimes, the hardest part of loving someone is knowing when to stop chasing their approval. If you've ever been made to feel small by the very person you sacrificed everything for, this story was written for you. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in his shoes? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Your voice matters, and your boundaries do too. See you soon in the next story.